about alchemical sexual alchemy. Do you know that the story of Jesus, how it's been altered in certain ways? I mean, yes, there was a guy, yes, there was teachings, all that stuff. The parallel between that and alchemical sex is that there's 33 vertebrae in your spine. There's 33 years in the life of Jesus Christ. Okay. There is a substance or liquid or a substance that comes from your medulla, which is basically completely looks like the Ark of the Covenant, has angels' wings around it, the whole thing. So this substance comes from your medulla, makes the trip down your spine to your sacrum, which is
quick, get addiction.
Christ coming down into human form.
Yeah.
And if you don't squander that essence, that sexual essence, it ascends again and goes back up to heaven, which is your thing. It's also the story of Santa Claus. Why he comes down the chimney is because this juice or this whatever substance actually passes what's called the claustrum, which is where they got
the knowledge of the sacred secretion, which he's just spoken about. And he calls it the alchemy of transformation of sexual energy, which is another way of perceiving it. But if you're sexually moral and you don't overindulge and become overly acidic, etc., then absolutely you can call it that. But I call it the sacred secretion. Others call it the Christ within. And it's the secretion I spoke about in length that we secrete within our bodies and then we return via correct living, via temperance and pure thoughts towards others, which lead to pure actions. And in my experience, service to God. I'm one of the blessed few on the planet who spent the last 5 years of my life living for that which God has asked me to live for, which turned out to be children in desperate need, as you all know here. This knowledge is so heavily suppressed. I know that it's a liberator for mankind, because the elitists, they suppress that which can quash their rule. Now you look at the Vatican suppressing it with their pinecone statues. You look at the misinterpretations done by accident by religious leaders all over the planet. This exists in the Dharma, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Bible, the Quran. It's everywhere. It's a common union that mankind could have to find some form of oneness between their belief systems. But everybody, unless you access it, you have a linear brain that says, no, this is the only possible way. You'll have Christians saying the only way to God is through Jesus, you can't do it through Allah. But what if the only way to God is through Jesus because Jesus was telling you to do what he told you to do? Why do you call me Lord and not do as I ask? As he said, don't fast, don't live for others, don't give it away to the poor. What's going to happen to you? You're not going to preserve the sacred secretion, which is just being referred to by a mainstream celebrity. This knowledge literally can liberate humanity, 100%. Humanity can be liberated by the knowledge of the sacred secretion, because in liberating themselves with that, they learn how the human body works at its best. Goodbye depression, goodbye lack of temperance, goodbye sexual immorality, goodbye pornography addictions, goodbye alcohol addictions, goodbye drug addictions, goodbye obsessive compulsive problems, goodbye judgment of others, goodbye nearly all negative behaviors. If our children were taught how to preserve that substance to get their body to vibrate in a way where they are constantly attuned antenna of prayer to the realm of God, and thus their heart is always roaring, always happy. That is the sacred secretion. That is the importance of it. And a man I made a video about recently, Jim Carrey, has just spoken about it in the public eye. And many thousands of... But it's important that people understand this science, because it is the physical functioning of the human body to reach God. And if we just persist to hear things and don't find the discipline to become a strong human being, as I said in a recent video, is not someone who can exercise important, but the true muscle of a human is the intellect, the wisdom and the knowledge. That's what sets us aside from the animal world. You want to lift weights to get strong? Go out in the jungle and fight a gorilla. You're not going to win. But if you want to overcome all aspects of all problems humanity face, this is where it'll come from, knowledge. And that man hopefully just opened the key, opened the door with a key to many people on the planet who can look into what he was saying, because it's true. I have used the sacred secretion. I have used even if you know it or not, you will too. If you fast, you pray, you live for others, you have pure thoughts, you will align your body to have the best possible balance that it can have. And you will be the best functioning human being you can be. And when I started practicing this, as well as seeking God with an open heart, I have done all that has been achieved here, using that every single day of my life.
Why did Jesus have to die? You know, that's a question that we all ask at some point, and I want to explain it in a way that might make sense with a visual. You see, Jesus came to take the punishment of our sin, the sin that you have done or would ever do. That's what he came to do. And see, you here look pretty good. I mean, come on, you look nice and clean, just the way you were meant to be. Oh, I could drink you up. But we've all done stuff that we shouldn't do. We've all sinned in different ways. And the problem is when we sin and we bring sin into our lives, it changes us. It changes who we are, and suddenly there's elements in us that weren't meant to be there. Maybe it's bad attitudes, or you yelled at your parents, or you lied to a friend, or you cheated on a test, or you hurt someone, or you hurt yourself, whatever it might be. It's not the way you were meant to be. And God saw this, and he didn't want it to be this way. He said, this was not how I intended you to be. So God had a perfect rescue plan, and that rescue plan was Jesus. Now, Jesus was perfect. He came and he lived a perfect life. He was without sin. So the question was, what would happen if Jesus took the sin of the whole world, all of the sin, and put it in himself? And so he went to the cross, and he took our sin. And Jesus took all that sin and put it in himself. But that's the thing, is Jesus took our sin to the grave, but then he left it there. He left that sin in the grave, and he came back with new life for all of us. And he was still perfect and pure and blameless and everything that we needed. And so you, with all of our sin and with all that's inside of us, you have the ability to say yes to Jesus, because we don't need sin anymore. Sin has been defeated by the power of the cross and what Jesus did and the power of his resurrection. And so when you say yes to Jesus and you ask him to fill you with his power, it changes everything. Jesus brings freedom. You couldn't have taken this out on your own. You could not remove the sin from yourself. Only Jesus could do that, because he died and rose again to defeat the power of sin and bring us true freedom. And that's why Jesus had to die.
Your Grace, why do you feel that so many people are pulling away from the traditional religions in this country, such as Christianity and so forth, and going for the trying to understand the Eastern religions? We hear a lot of swamis and gurus and other type of yogi and so forth. Why do you feel that people are pulling away from the traditional Christian standards here?
But we see that the Christian churches, especially I've seen in London, mostly closed. People are not interested, or the Christian leaders, they cannot make them interested.
Why? Did Christianity fail the people, which is why they're turning to other things? Or?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You say that Hare Krishna consciousness pretty much takes the absolute truths from the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and the Vedic.
Yeah, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Religion means to understand God.
I understand, but do you feel that in getting truths from various places like the Bible and the Quran and so forth, don't you run into conflicts at all or contradictions in those particular philosophies?
No, I don't find any conflict, because the ultimate goal is God. So you have to understand God and try to love him. So you can go through any religious process. If the goal is attained, that you understand what is goal, and you try to love him, then your life is perfect.
Almost every moment of every day, we are being bombarded with information. Much of that information seeks to change us. Whether it is well-meaning relatives, opinionated friends, aggressive advertisers, religious dogmas, or political propaganda, most of us have been forced to build up strong resistance to all of this pressure. The truth may be out there, but what are the chances of actually finding it, with all the clutter that comes up the moment you try to tune in? And here I am, just one more voice in all the babble. Why should you listen to me? Please give me just a few seconds to present my case. I have no product to sell, no personality to promote, no church to join. This alone suggests that what I have to say may be more than the usual religious static. In this particular video, I will not engage in the hundreds of theological nets that we can so easily be tricked into defending. I'm here for one reason alone, and that is to defend and promote the teachings of Jesus, the Christ, the only begotten Son of God. It is my experience, whenever I mention Jesus, that all professing Christians immediately assume that they're doing the same thing, that is, promoting Jesus. Ah, yes, they say. After all, I'm a Christian too. Like me, they can see flaws in just about everyone else, but not in themselves. They personally are convinced that God is on their side, that they are an exception, if not the exception. Obviously, it's possible that you are the exception. But let us reserve judgment on that for a minute or two. I'm here to tell you that the whole world, that almost certainly includes you as well, has either never met Jesus or has met him and rejected him. And I will give you evidence of the authenticity of this claim. You won't like it, but you will not be able to refute it. Jesus compared himself and his teachings to a cornerstone, or a solid rock being used as a foundation for a building. He predicted that all of the religious builders would reject the cornerstone or replace the solid rock with the shifting sands of tradition. Like the Pharisees who had Jesus executed, all of those religious activists would talk about prayer, praise, helping the poor, fasting, sexual morality, Bible prophecy, miracles, casting out demons, just about anything you can identify with modern-day Christianity. But, referring to all of these people, Jesus promised that when he comes to judge the world, he will be ashamed of them. He will confess that he never knew them, and he will cast them into outer darkness, where there will be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. Please notice that I'm not talking about some bizarre cult leaders or loose cannons with incredibly false doctrines. I'm talking about the most respectable and conservative religious leaders of the day. Men who had been placed in their positions in accord with the laws of the Old Testament. Jesus said that they will be cast out of heaven for but one reason, and that is that they did not receive God's ultimate revelation to the human race. His message of salvation as delivered by his only Son. The religious world today, like the religious world in Bible times, will not be condemned so much for what it teaches as it will be condemned for what it does not teach. What you too very likely are not teaching, and that is the teachings of Jesus. I have traveled the world for more than 40 years, listening to people of almost every persuasion tell me about their various plans of salvation. I've tried to listen sympathetically and to acknowledge whatever truth I could find in what each of them had to say. You can be almost certain that I have heard your plan somewhere along the way, or one very much like it. Yet I have not found a single one which seriously takes into account the teachings of Jesus. Do you understand the enormity of what I'm saying here? Not one of them starts or finishes with obedience to Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God. Every single one steers me away from the teachings of Jesus and into the teachings of some human replacement. Everywhere I look, there are empty wells and clouds without water, just as the Bible described it. Oh, there are many, many wells and an abundance of clouds, each professing loudly to have that much needed water. But they are all dry, all empty, all counterfeits. Jesus said it would be like this in the days before he returns. He compared them to the days of Noah and the days of Lot. Think about it. In the whole world, God found only one family that was faithful in the days of Noah. And then he called on Noah to stay faithfully working for literally decades on a boat far away from water, with not a drop of rain in sight. It was a huge, and we have so much more to go on today. We have written records of much that Jesus did and said. All of human history, even in this godless and decadent age, is measured from the time when Jesus was born. But what have we done with his teachings? No, don't tell me about your so-called Christian faith if it does not line up with what Jesus taught. In the days of Lot, Abraham was convinced there must be hundreds of faithful believers in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why do you suppose he thought that? Surely it was because the cities were full of people who were respectable. They must have been at least superficially religious. We hear much today about the abominable sinners that were in Sodom and Gomorrah. But Jesus said nothing about religious or sexual abominations in Sodom and Gomorrah. Instead, he spoke about the great masses of those two cities, the ones who married and raised families, the ones who planted crops and built houses, the ones who flooded the shopping malls every day of the week, buying and selling. They were all destroyed with fire and brimstone from heaven, because they were all counterfeits. For all their religious talk, they did not really care about what God was saying. We are living in those times today. Everywhere we look, there are religious counterfeits. Some of them start out sounding so pious, so convincing, so spiritual and emotional. But in the end, they leave us high and dry, without real answers to the needs of our souls. It is precisely because the genuine article has not yet been offered that there is such a proliferation of religious denominations in the world today. Every new guru knows more than anything else that no other organization has yet hit on the answer. They're all bluffing. They're all majoring on the minors. The world is still stumbling along in the dark, both inside and outside of the religious institutions. So each new kid on the block comes up with some new yet relatively trivial point of doctrine with which to assure the world that they can find what they failed to find and all the other formulas just by turning to the new one. I don't have a new formula. All I have is the old one. The one that you and all the others have pushed aside for so long. The one that has been left out of every church and every plan of salvation. The missing cornerstone. Friends, the creator of the universe sent his only begotten Son, Jesus, to this planet to give us the answers. I'm pretty sure you've heard that much, or something pretty close to it before, but it always stops there. Everything that has been offered as an answer to your problems has been little more than a fresh coat of paint over the same untreated rust that eats away at your soul and at the souls of everyone else on the planet. Until we, you, they, can recognize this, we are never going to look for, much less find, the real thing. In this series of tapes, I'm going to look at the answers that Jesus has given us. And you are going to see how they resoundingly expose all of the other plans of salvation as worse than counterfeits. Many, if not most of them, are outright contradictions, teaching exactly the opposite of what Jesus taught. All I ask you to do is to hear what I have to say, constantly asking yourself this question: is he saying something that supports what Jesus taught? Or is he saying something that contradicts what Jesus taught? And while you're at it, every time that you find yourself reacting to what I say, ask yourself, as honestly as you possibly can, am I reacting because of my loyalty to what Jesus taught? Or am I reacting because I have a problem with what Jesus taught? You may be surprised by your own answers.